people got really burned by the last boom and bust. I think people have short memories, but not that short. And I think a lot of people remember FTX. They remember Paris Hilton trying to shill a Bored Ape on Jimmy Fallon and how cringe that was. They remember all these companies saying, oh, we're going to put our project on the blockchain, and then sort of quietly discontinuing those efforts. And so things are a little stagnant right now in the crypto world.
Hello and welcome to Tech Won't Save Us, made in partnership with The Nation magazine. I'm your host, Marx, and this week my guest is Molly White. Molly writes the Citation Needed newsletter and is the creator of Web3 is Going Just Great and Follow the Crypto. Now you might be saying, what, another crypto episode? Didn't that die a few years ago? Well, I was thinking something similar. But then I was shocked to see that Molly launched Follow the Crypto, which looks into campaign finance and how the crypto industry is putting a ton of money into this US election, in order to try to get people who will pass favorable legislation to allow them to do what they want, I guess. But given that the crypto bubble crashed a couple of years back, I was really surprised to hear that, millions and millions of dollars were flooding into this race from the crypto industry to make it one of the biggest contributors this cycle. And so I wanted to know why that was, what was happening, and what the relationship between the crypto industry and, the Republicans and the Democrats, but specifically Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is, right? And what we might expect from these candidates if they do come to office once again, and what they might even be proposing about the crypto industry. Luckily, we're not hearing too much from the Democrats that is particularly positive on crypto. Obviously, there are some people in there who are much more open to this industry than others. Those people tend to receive a lot of campaign donations from the crypto industry, of course, no surprise there. But that party hasn't embraced cryptocurrency in the same way that the Republicans has, to the degree that Donald Trump was even speaking at the Bitcoin conference this year, giving a rambling speech that repeated a bunch of talking points from the crypto industry. Honestly, I have to say, I almost found it refreshing to dig into crypto once again after so long talking about AI. At this point, I'm just so exhausted with AI and discussions of AI. I hope that this bubble bursts any day so we can stop talking about it and move on to something else. So, it was nice to dip back into the crypto waters for a moment, talking to Molly. And I think that you're going to enjoy this as well. If you do, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. You can share the show on social media or with any friends or colleagues who you think would learn from it. And if you do want to support the work that goes into making Tech Won't Save Us every week, so we can keep having these critical, in-depth conversations about the tech industry, you can join supporters like Kim from Denver, Max from Stockholm, and Kat from Kitchener in Canada by going to patreon.com/techwon'tsave us, where you can become a supporter yourself. Thanks so much and enjoy this week's conversation. Molly, welcome back to Tech Won't Save Us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always great to chat with you. In the past, we're usually talking about Web3 is going just great and what you've been finding, as you've been following this crypto industry. You're still looking at crypto, of course, but you have a new project called Follow the Crypto. Can you tell us what that is and why you decided to get it started?
Yeah, so Follow the Crypto is really just giving a view into the crypto industry's spending on the 2024 election cycle in the United States. I started it when I was doing my usual crypto research, and I was starting to hear a lot about donations to political causes, where Coinbase, was announcing, oh, we just donated $5 million, $15 million to these super PACs. And the numbers were really starting to add up, I noticed. And so I started digging into it. The FEC, the Federal Elections Commission in the United States, offers, pretty transparent view into election spending and fundraising. And so I was digging around, but I wasn't quite getting the clarity of information that I wanted just pawing through these FEC filings. So I wanted more transparency into it for myself. And then I figured, well, if I want it, other people probably want it. And so I decided to make a website out of it where people could just go and look at how much they're spending, how much these crypto-focused super PACs are raising, which elections they are trying to influence, and things like that.
Yeah, and it's a really cool website. It's really like straightforward, to the point. Like, here's what you need to know about where all this money is coming from and what it's doing, right? You mentioned super PACs there. Even for some Americans, but certainly for non-Americans, they might not really know what a super PAC is. So can you give us an idea of that?
Right. So super PACs are kind of a special type of political committee in the United States where they are at least nominally independent from any specific candidate. And they're really not allowed to coordinate with candidates on political spending in the same way that, specific candidates' fundraising committees are. What really sets them apart is there are really no limits on contributions to super PACs. So while individuals are limited to only giving, a couple $1,000s to any individual candidate directly, people and companies can contribute millions of dollars to super PACs, which then spend the money on various candidates, however they see fit.
Yeah, fundraising and getting door knocking efforts going, all those sorts of things, right? From reading your website, it looks like Fair Shake is the biggest like crypto focused PAC out there. Can you tell us what that PAC is, like what it's trying to advocate for? And are there other big ones as well, or is that the main one?
So Fair Shake is definitely by far the largest crypto-focused super PAC. And I mean, it's sort of what it says on the tin, but they're really trying to support candidates who take a friendly view to the cryptocurrency industry as far as, lighter touch regulations, supporting bills that the industry has championed. And then they're also opposing candidates that they view to be hostile to the industry in terms of supporting stricter regulations or opposing those bills that the industry has wanted to have passed. And Fair Shake is certainly the largest crypto-focused super PAC in terms of the money that they've raised. They've raised over $160 million at this point. There are two other political action committees that are adjacent to Fair Shake, and they're called Defend American Jobs and Protect Progress. Notably, none of them have anything to do with crypto in the name, which I think is actually pretty notable. Defend American Jobs is dedicated to supporting conservative candidates. Protect Progress is the progressive counterpart of that. But actually, I think it's somewhat interesting to note that they're basically all the same group. Fair Shake is very closely connected to both of those super PACs and has funneled money into both of those super PACs. And so my observation from watching the spending coming out of these committees is that Fair Shake will donate to candidates that are a little bit more center of the road. And then if there is a very progressive or a very conservative candidate, the contributions will often come out of the other super PACs. My guess is to sort of, obfuscate to some extent the type of spending that's happening here, but they are effectively the same group.
That's interesting. When I think about defending American jobs, the first thing that comes to mind is giving lighter regulation to cryptocurrency companies. I don't know about you.
Yeah, and protecting progress, that's the same, and giving a fair shake. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not uncommon for super PACs to have names like this. Like you'll often see any super PAC has just a very vague name, and then you'll have to go look up, okay, so what are they actually doing? And the crypto ones have certainly followed that template. But, I think it's actually part of a broader pattern where a lot of these super PACs, although the story out of the industry is that cryptocurrency and crypto policy is a major voter issue where people are very concerned about the future of crypto policy, they don't seem to actually really believe the story that they're telling because they are often papering over their own connections to crypto with these very benign names that are completely vague, but also the ads that they're running in these campaigns don't tend to mention cryptocurrency at all. They often don't even mention technology or economic policy even. They just sort of parrot whatever they think might help the particular candidate without going into the crypto issue.
Interesting. It's like, we'll get this person who we know is going to help us, but let's not talk very much about the crypto side of things until we actually get them in office and they can do what they're going to do to try to help us out.
Yeah, it is interesting because, like I said, they've been really pushing this story that crypto is a big voter issue, but I think they understand that a lot of people are actually kind of turned off by crypto, and they would see a candidate who's often not particularly interested in the crypto topic start repeating lines about crypto, and they don't tend to react well to that. There have been a couple of campaigns across the country where a candidate has taken the crypto angle and gotten support from these super PACs, and their constituents have taken it to mean like they're selling out, that they're accepting billionaire money from out of state. And so I think that's largely why the super PACs have been careful to not really stress that connection.
Yeah, and those constituents wouldn't be wrong, really.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Have you noticed, as you're seeing this money flow, like, are there particular races or particular candidates that you see the crypto industry like particularly focused on, either having win or, having defeated?
Yes, there have been a handful of races that they've spent quite a lot of money on. And so far, it's mostly been congressional primaries. Those are just wrapping up now. We're getting to the tail end of that. And so I think we're going to start seeing more spending going towards general elections. But so far, we've seen a huge amount of spending to oppose Katie Porter in the California Senate race. Fairshake spent around $10 million to oppose her, and she was defeated in that primary. There were other major opposition spending efforts against Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, a handful of politicians along those lines, which also were successful. And then they have been doing a fair bit of support spending as well, both towards Democrats and Republicans, but with a bit of a Republican bent, I would say. And those races have had some mixed results, but again, mostly success, I would say, supporting candidates through the primaries. And then, like I said, we'll start to see the general election shake out pretty soon.
That's really interesting. And I guess not surprising that it's some of the more progressive ones in particular, the Katie Porters, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, that they're particularly targeting, because I'm sure that generally these are people who are quite opposed to cryptocurrency, basically the light, loose crypto regulations that the industry would want to see. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Katie Porter was quite involved with a lot more kind of financial issues and things like that. So it's maybe not particularly surprising that that's one of the ones that they really went after.
Yeah, and Katie Porter was also broadly seen to be very close with Elizabeth Warren, who is kind of public enemy number one in the crypto world. And so I think that really drove a lot of the spending, because, Katie Porter, she certainly has had a long history of, financial topics that she's been invested in, but she's never been super hawkish on crypto specifically. And so it was a little bit unusual at first from, I was looking at it and I was like, why do they care so much about Katie Porter? And then it became clear that it was really this allyship with Elizabeth Warren that seemed to be a major issue. And we've seen that in a couple of other races as well, where people who are associated with Warren have been on the losing end, at least spending wise.
That's fascinating. And I guess, again, like, not particularly surprising. Is the crypto industry like pushing any particular bills or things like that? Or are they really just trying to get people who they know would be more open to the types of things that they would want to get? And then moving forward, they're going to try to get them to pass specific regulations or whatnot that would be beneficial to the industry?
Yeah, so there have been a handful of crypto-related bills that have been in Congress over the past couple of years that they have wanted to see pass. It seems like a lot of the decisions that they're making on who to support, at least when it comes to incumbent candidates who are running for re-election, whether those candidates supported those bills. And so you can look there's a website that Coinbase's Stand with Crypto advocacy group created that gives politicians a report card basically on how friendly or anti-crypto they are. And a lot of it comes down to, okay, did they vote for FIT 21, which is a very pro-crypto bill that the industry has supported? SAB 121 is a SEC bulletin, basically, that the House tried to overturn. And ultimately, they were not successful in doing that. But the voting record on that is being used now to determine who's pro-crypto, who's anti-crypto. So they, I think, have kind of a grudge against people who maybe didn't support the bills that they wanted to see pass. Fit 21 is still going through Congress, but, they would love to see that pass for sure.
I guess, one of the bigger questions I have, and there are a number of things I still want to kind of jump off on based on what you were talking about there, but how is it that in 2024, the crypto industry is still such a big player in like campaign finance and kind of shaping these different races that are playing out across the country? Because I think for like the average person who's thinking about it or who's been paying attention to, the crypto industry or the tech industry more broadly, we had this bubble a couple of years ago that really started to implode, in the latter half of 2021, continuing through 2022. And of course, we more recently saw Sam Bankman-Fried go to prison for fraud. And, it looked like this industry was kind of buttoned up. It was done. We moved on to AI. How is it that crypto is still a thing and is still spending so much money in these electoral races?
Well, I was saying this during the crash of 22. I thought the reports of crypto's death were greatly exaggerated. Crypto tends to go in cycles like this, where there'll be a huge boom and then things just absolutely implode. And it looks like things are over, crypto's done, Bitcoin's dead, whatever it might be. And certainly headlines will often say things like that. But inevitably, it seems to come back, which is really why, I've said that I do think that without strong regulation, the industry will continue to go through these cycles that tend to have really damaging effects on people. Another thing that I think is really important to note is that a lot of people were wiped out during the crypto crash. Everyday people had been convinced of this story that, Bitcoin is a great way to grow your wealth or protect your wealth or whatever the story might be.
Save for retirement even. Remember some particular podcasters reading those advertisements.
Yeah, I haven't heard one of those ads in a while.
Yeah.
There were all these stories going around, and a lot of the people who bought into that and who, were like, okay, I guess, I have to do this to get the returns that I want, or, to stay up to date or to get in on the big tech investment, were really wiped out by that. They lost a lot of money, but the companies often did not. It was not the companies that were really suffering here. Certainly there were companies in the crypto world that were, dramatically over leveraged or doing really shady stuff, and they fell apart in, again, very dramatic ways. But, the Coinbases of the world, they were just taking fees. They were skimming off the top here, and the actual success or failure of the cryptocurrency sector didn't impact them as much as it did the everyday people who were holding crypto. And so they were able to weather the storm, often with relatively good revenue. And they now have, a substantial amount of money to burn on politics, especially because a lot of these regulations are viewed by the industry as very existential. Will Coinbase in its current form be able to continue to exist if a new group of legislators comes in that's more consumer protection focused, more interested in cracking down on this type of thing? Or conversely, could they expand their business? Could they do more of the types of things that they've been wanting to do but have been afraid to do because of the regulatory status of the industry, if they're able to install politicians who are willing to roll back some of those protections?
That makes sense. It still is surprising to see them deploying so much money in races where like Fair Shake is, I believe your website says it's the PAC with like the most money that it's raised this cycle.
It's a little bit hard to get the precise number on that because there are some issues with the FEC data. But when you look at all super PACs, at least, and you exclude some of the other types of committees, Fair Shake is somewhere between number 1 and maybe number 4 in terms of overall funds raised this cycle. And that's going up against the Trump super PACs, the Senate majority PAC, some of these huge, huge super PACs. So it's really, shocking to see that. That was partly why I started the site, is I was really surprised to see that amount of money coming from an industry that's relatively small when you compare it to other industries that spend heavily on politics in the United States. You look at the pharma industry, the energy industries, things like that. They're trillions of dollar industries. And then there's like little old crypto, but it's pouring vast amounts of money into campaign spending now, which is partly why I started paying attention.
Yeah, it is wild to see it. And I'm not surprised that you picked up on that and were like, what is going on here? But you mentioned Coinbase a few times there. And I think it's probably a good idea that we talk about that company in particular, because as you were looking into this, you found that they were potentially doing some things that seemed like they were in violation of campaign finance laws, if I'm getting that right. Do you want to talk to us a bit about what you found about Coinbase and why that's concerning?
Sure. So Coinbase has been one of the biggest contributors to these super PACs. They've been incredibly heavily involved in these lobbying efforts, both financially and in terms of trying to rally their customer base to support politicians directly. And so, they, over the period of the last 2 years or so, have spent almost $50 million on Fairshake specifically, this one major super PAC. And as I was going through the contributions to that super PAC, I also was aware of the fact that Coinbase was recently selected as a federal contractor that is in charge of custodying the cryptocurrency that is seized by law enforcement in, when they bust one of the Silk Road hackers or something like that. They seize all these Bitcoins or some other crypto tokens and they hold on to them.
There's like a crazy amount of Bitcoin being held by like the US government, isn't there?
Yeah, the US government is one of the largest Bitcoin holders out there, which is hilarious in some ways and terrifying in others. Yeah, so they have this huge, stash of Bitcoin that they're hanging on to. And obviously there are security issues there. My other website shows that crypto wallets are hacked all the time. And so they have to have some way of holding on to this. And they recently decided to outsource that to one of these crypto custody firms, and they ended up selecting Coinbase for the job. So Coinbase now is controlling or custodying a lot of this cryptocurrency for the US Marshals. They also are helping them sell it off whenever those assets are formally forfeited. It used to be that the government would sell them at auction, and it was this whole big thing. And now they're doing it through Coinbase, which is a little bit less of a big splash every time it happens. But yeah, so, basically Coinbase was awarded this federal contract in July, but going through these contributions that they were making to Fairshake, one of them stood out. They made a $25 million contribution to Fairshake. And when you actually look at the laws around campaign finance and campaign contributions from companies that have federal government contracts, there is a prohibition where they are not allowed to contribute to candidates, to political campaigns, anything of that sort, during the period where they are either negotiating the contract or they're carrying out the contract. And when you actually look at the contract that Coinbase was applying for, they began those negotiations before the $25 million contribution was made, meaning that that contribution was prohibited under campaign finance laws that are really focused at avoiding what's called pay to play, which is where companies that are pursuing these government contracts make contributions potentially in sort of a quid pro quo manner where they then get these very lucrative government contracts. And in this case, the contract is $32 million. So certainly not a small amount of money for Coinbase. And so I spoke with some other folks who are certainly a lot more familiar with campaign finance law than I am and was like, hey, am I crazy here? Like, am I missing something? And they basically said, no, this does look like a violation. You should really report this to the FEC. And so I ended up teaming up with Public Citizen, which is a advocacy group that does a fair bit of this type of stuff. And we submitted a complaint to the FEC a couple of weeks ago now, and we're sort of awaiting news in that department.
And I'm sure Coinbase has reacted totally normally to that filing, right?
Yeah, very professional, normal stuff coming out of Coinbase. Yeah. So, when I was first researching this, I, was intending to write about it. And so I reached out to Coinbase for comment, as you are supposed to do. And I also reached out to Fairshake, to give everyone a chance to sort of explain what was going on, really. And Coinbase did respond, although, I'd asked them like 4 questions and they didn't respond to the questions. They just said, Coinbase follows all the laws, basically. It was the response. I was like, oh, well, in that case.
Yeah. Phrased just like that, I'm sure,
Yeah. I was like, oh, well, I guess there's nothing here. I'll move on.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. So, I put that in my piece and I published. And then shortly after I published the piece, the chief legal officer of Coinbase, Paul Grewal, decided to respond, not to me, but by tweeting about it, as they want to do. And basically said she has no idea what she's talking about. We are not a federal government contractor, despite this federal government contract that you can see on the website that lists federal government contracts. And, he had this theory, basically, which is that the way that this contract has been structured, the money that is paying Coinbase for their services is coming out of the pool of seized assets. And so the theory that Paul Grewal had is that, well, because of that, these are not funds appropriated by Congress, which is like kind of a weird in the weeds type of thing. But it comes down to the fact that in the regulations, that is a part of how they define federal government contractor is, okay, so they have a contract and they're being paid with funds appropriated by the Congress. And so that was sort of the theory is like, okay, that we're not a contractor, so it's totally fine. The problem is that doesn't actually seem to be well supported by the law. So this, again, is sort of above my pay grade as far as my own expertise. But Public Citizen has lawyers and other experts who are very familiar with campaign finance law who basically looked at it and they determined that the asset forfeiture fund, this pool of cryptocurrency and other assets, is a congressional appropriation, and it is the Congress who authorizes the Department of Justice and the U.S. Marshals to spend it on contracts like this. And so Coinbase is very much a federal contractor, and they are prohibited from making these contributions. So, it'll come down to the FEC ultimately to make that determination and to decide whether or not to pursue an enforcement action. But Coinbase certainly has vehemently denied the allegations in a very public way that certainly seemed intended to kind of sick people on me a little bit. Grewal was like retweeting his own tweets to try to stir up the Coinbase supporters to come and call me an idiot and that kind of thing, which was very irritating, but definitely par for the course from that company, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sure by now, I don't know if you'd be like public enemy number 1, but certainly like near the top of their list, right? They're like, oh my God, Molly's doing something about us again. And they're like losing their minds.
She's sniffing around.
Yeah. I think it's just like Uber can't be a transportation company because it's a tech company. Maybe it's more this tech exceptionalism, right? We can't be a federal contractor because we're a tech company. We're different, right?
Yeah, no, the theories are definitely really strange. And some of the comments that I've been seeing are just like very bizarre, like, well, how could anyone take custody of government crypto if this is a prohibition that applies? And it's like, well, they would have to stop making campaign contributions like every other federal contractor does.
They could have even timed it a little bit better to send that 25 million before they started contracting.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, they've made around 50 million in total in contributions. They were certainly able to do this previously, but they decided to just, completely ignore the prohibition that applies to them. And yeah, it was very strange. And like Grewal accused me of implying that they were partisan because in addition to the $25 million contribution to Fairshake, there was also a $500,000 contribution they made to I think it was the House Republicans. It might have been the Senate Republicans. I don't remember off the top of my head. And that was also made during this prohibited time period. And so we mentioned it in the complaint and I mentioned it in my reporting. And Grewal was like, how dare you imply that we are contributing unequally to various candidates? Look, we've made these $500,000 contributions to both House and Senate Republicans and Democrats. And he was like all mad that we were like implying that they were Republican donors, which was bizarre because A, we didn't make any allegations like that. I didn't imply that Coinbase was donating unequally to Republicans because he's right. They have made roughly equivalent donations to both parties. But also, the reason that I only mentioned one of them was because only one of them was made during the prohibited time period. And it's like, of course, I didn't go into detail on the other contributions that they've made because they were permitted. I'm not going to go complain to the FEC about something they're allowed to do just because I don't like it, So
this is about the illegal stuff that they don't want to admit is illegal. So
right. Yeah. It was like this weird, like, I can't believe you're implying this thing. And it's like, no, I'm implying that you broke the law, which you did.
Yeah, it's a good deflection though,
Yeah, I think that's really what it comes down to is really just trying to shift the focus away from the violation and instead making it about, oh, Molly's so partisan, and there were other things around, there's no barrier to filing these complaints, suggesting I have no idea what I'm talking about, which, he's not wrong, but I do know how to talk to people who do know what they're talking about. And
yeah.
So
Public Citizen has lawyers. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, and they've been involved in campaign finance advocacy for a long time. This is not the first FEC complaint they've filed. They have experts on their staff who do this stuff all the time.
It is fascinating that, you were able to find this and basically catch them in it. I'm sure they expected nobody to pay attention to that if they knew what they were doing at all, But yeah, I'll be interested to watch to see how it all plays out. Is there a timeline on something like that? Or is that the kind of thing that where it can take a while to work its way through?
There is a little bit of a timeline at first where the FEC, they have acknowledged the complaint that we submitted, and they have to basically check that it's a valid complaint and that we actually allege something that is a violation. And they've done that and accepted the complaint in that sense. Then they reach out to Coinbase for a response. And I think Coinbase has 15 days to respond or something like that. And then after that, they take a vote. The commission takes a vote on whether or not there's reason to believe that a violation occurred. At that point, either they dismiss the complaint because they don't believe a violation has occurred, or they open an investigation. And once that happens, the timeline sort of becomes very vague. It's, they can spend a lot of time communicating with Coinbase, potentially doing more investigative work around what actually happened. And, some FEC complaints take years, unfortunately, to resolve. But we should at least know fairly soon if they decide to open the investigation.
As a person who is pretty visible and opinionated online, I'm hyper aware of safety and security. It's easier than ever to find personal information about people online, and all that data can have actual consequences in the real world. Delete Me is designed to stop that from happening, and that's why I've been using it. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal info from the largest people search databases on the web, and in the process, helps prevent potential ID theft, doxing, and phishing scams. To put it simply, Delete Me does all of the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal info off the web. Data brokers hate Delete Me. When you sign up, Delete Me immediately goes to work scrubbing all of your personal information from data broker platforms. Your personal profile is no longer theirs to sell. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting TECH to 64,000. That's TECH to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text TECH to 64,000. Once again, that's TECH to 64000. Disclaimer, message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. You've mentioned a few times the partisan nature of donations and the fact that donations have been going to both sides, but it's weighted a little differently depending on how you look. Overall, sure, Coinbase might have made donations to Republicans and to Democrats, but if you look overall, it seems like, based on looking at your website, that there's a lot more money going into supporting Republicans properly. And there's certainly money going to supporting Democrats, but there's also a lot of money going to opposing Democrats specifically. Can you talk about the partisan nature of donations and how you're seeing that play out, and whether it suggests any kind of shift in how the crypto industry, kind of associates itself with one party or another?
Yeah, so there has been somewhat more spending going towards supporting Republicans, but, it's not completely blowing out the Democrats. It's like $17.4 million supporting Republicans to about $13.9 million supporting Democrats at last count, at least. And so, there's a little bit more going to the Republicans. The biggest difference is in terms of the opposition spending, as you mentioned. So they've spent almost $14 million to oppose Democrats versus a couple $100,000 to oppose Republicans.
And is that particularly blown out the opposition stuff just because of how much they spent on Katie Porter specifically?
Yeah, that's a major part of it. $10 million to oppose Katie Porter out of the $13.8 million in opposition spending. And then you add in another $2 million to oppose Jamal Bowman, another 1.4 to oppose Cori Bush, and that's basically it. But, if you look at those races, it's hard to say specifically that they are opposing Democrats because they're intending for Republicans to be installed in those races. In some of these races, Jamal Bowman, for example, the likelihood of a Republican winning that district in the general is infinitesimal. I mean, there's really no likelihood of that happening. So it's hard to say necessarily that they are supporting Republicans when they make those contributions, but they are really spending to oppose those Democrats versus to support their opponents, which is, I think, kind of notable in these cases. Like with Jamal Bowman, the goal really was to get him out of office, and who cares who comes in next? They're going to be better than Jamal Bowman was really the feeling in that race. And that's not the case across the board. I mean, I think with Katie Porter, they've got some allies that could potentially come in. Adam Schiff has been somewhat supportive of the cryptocurrency industry. And so they're certainly hoping to see him installed, even as a Democrat. But yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, we've seen a little bit more support to the Republicans. But I think what this signals really is that crypto has historically in the US been something that Republicans have supported more than the Democrats. There have been a couple of Democrats or independents who have been vocally supportive of crypto, but most of it's coming from the Republican side of the aisle. But I think the cryptocurrency industry has realized that just getting the Republicans on board isn't going to be enough to do what they want to do, that they can't rely only on that one party, and that they really need to try to get as many people as possible on board with the crypto agenda in order to do the things that they want to do. And I think that's why we've seen so much of the spending going towards Democrats, is there's this feeling that if we don't get some of these Dems on board, we're never going to get past some of these barriers. For example, the SAB 121 bill that they were hoping to pass that would have overturned that SEC policy that they are very opposed to, it was vetoed by Biden. And so then they needed to get, this sort of supermajority to actually override that veto, and they were unable to do that. And so that's the type of thing where you can't just rely on a Republican Democrat split where all the Republicans support it and all the Democrats oppose, because you can't override a veto with something like that. So I think that's a big part of it is that there's really been this strong push, at least from some parts of the cryptocurrency industry, to court Democratic Congress people. And even in the presidential campaigns, we're starting to see a lot of that as well, where people in the crypto world are trying to get Kamala and her campaign on board with crypto policy and various initiatives that they're starting to push.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, right? Even to think about, it seemed like a few weeks ago when I was talking to Jacob Silverman that there was a lot of momentum behind Trump and the Republicans. They had been leading Biden in the polls for a while. That lead was growing, especially after the poor debate performance that Biden had against Trump. And then, of course, in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt against Trump, it was like, okay, the Republicans are like going to sweep. Like they have so much momentum now. Things are going so good. But then, Trump had announced Vance as the running mate, and that was a disaster. And Biden finally stepped back and allowed Kamala to step into the candidate position. And now they have Tim Walz. And it seems like the Democrats have this momentum that was hard to even imagine a month ago, right? And so if you're thinking about trying to get crypto policy through, it's increasingly looking like you're probably going to need some more Democrat support than you were expecting to need, even if the Republicans were going to win. But now, with how things seem to be shifting, trying to get Democrats on side seems like it's probably even of greater importance than it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, there's really this moment, I think, of euphoria within the cryptocurrency world where Trump seemed like a absolute, he's just going to sweep Biden in the presidential campaign and everything was going to go their way. Around that time, Trump had come out and spoken positively about Bitcoin. He'd agreed to speak at this Bitcoin conference as a headline speaker. And the crypto world was like absolutely euphoric about it. And they were gloating about how crypto was suddenly going to become, this big portion of national policy under Trump. A lot of people in the sort of executive ranks of the crypto industry came out with this wholehearted support of Trump, donated millions of dollars. And then, things took a very sudden turn when Biden stepped down, Kamala Harris stepped in, Tim Walz was chosen as the VP, Vance was chosen as this sort of bizarre running mate for Trump. And now it seems like the crypto industry is sort of on its back foot going, oh, shoot, we were a little too enthusiastic there, and we may have burned some bridges that we may now really need to start mending, because if Trump is not a shoo-in for the presidency and we've just gone all in behind him, what is left if, Harris is ultimately elected? And so now we're starting to see efforts coming out of the industry to speak with the Harris campaign, to try to court various Democratic lawmakers, to meet with people in the Biden administration who are involved in crypto policy. There was this very sudden shift. The strategy first was, let's just beat them, get them out of office, replace them with our own guys. Trump will come in and totally replace all of the regulatory folks with people who are friendly to crypto. I mean, he said as much at the Bitcoin conference. And now there's this push of like, oh no, we need to make sure that if Harris is elected, we haven't completely alienated everyone in her administration.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that is happening like beyond the crypto industry in a lot more of Silicon Valley, because it feels like a lot of them kind of bought in at the peak and then everything crashed like right after that. And they were like, oh man, what have I done? Because a lot of them have gone pretty quiet since then, except maybe Elon Musk.
Yeah, I saw a really great tweet that was like a headline about the Andreessen Horowitz people who decided to support Trump like right as things took a turn. And it was like, wow, that's like buying the peak, buying the top.
Yeah, usually they're trying to sell at that moment, but they bought right in, Yeah. You talked about Trump. I want to talk about how the crypto industry is approaching both candidates. And you talked about how Trump spoke at the Bitcoin conference. Can you give us an idea of the types of things that he was saying and how much it felt like he really understood the issue of crypto, or was really just kind of repeating what crypto insiders had been telling him, or, kind of got his policy team to put together or something? Did you have a vibe of that?
Yeah, so he spoke at the Bitcoin 2024 conference, which is the biggest conference, at least in the United States,
Yeah, and he was like the headline
Bitcoin
act.
He was the number one guy. He was the talk of the whole conference. It was really a very political conference this year. I mean, Trump was speaking, but they also had RFK Jr., they had Vivek Ramaswamy, they had a couple of other Congress people. There was also Ro Khanna, who's a Democratic congressperson. He was like the token Democrat there. But yeah, I mean, so Trump gave this headline speech. It was very Trumpian, very rambling. He spoke about electric vehicles and Hillary Clinton and Biden. And, it was like a rally speech more than anything. But he obviously touched on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency more broadly. And you could definitely tell as he was speaking that, there are these very obvious shifts where he goes from scripted to unscripted and back again. And he was really on script when it was the crypto talking points, which really led me to believe that it was his policy team, probably with input from people who know what sounds good to the Bitcoin community, who are feeding him the lines that he needed to say about cryptocurrency. And it was pretty expected stuff about firing Gary Gensler, who's the chairman of the SEC. And I said earlier that Elizabeth Warren was public enemy number one, but she might be public enemy number two compared to Gary Gensler, because he's really seen as the enemy of crypto.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And there were other things that he mentioned about, he said, I'm going to get rid of people who, the regulators who hate your industry, and I'm going to install regulators who love your industry, because that's how regulators should be. RFK Jr. had spoken the day before and had made a big promise about establishing a strategic reserve of Bitcoin, which was very popular among Bitcoiners, as you might imagine. And so Trump, it looked like maybe there had been like a last minute change to his speech where he also tried to say that, but his was sort of a different version of it, where instead of going out and buying Bitcoin to establish a reserve, he started saying, well, we're just going to keep all the Bitcoin that the marshals seize pretty much. And that will be the strategic reserve, which wasn't as exciting as RFK's promise to go spend billions and billions of dollars on Bitcoin, but it certainly got some applause from the audience. So it was kind of what you might expect from that kind of a speech, but certainly pandering to the Bitcoin crowd. It did seem when he was off script that he maybe isn't quite as much of an enthusiast as his team would like him to portray. He made a kind of a weird comment when he was talking about that strategic reserve, where he mentioned that the Bitcoins in the U.S. Marshals Fund were stolen from you, the audience, basically. This idea that those seized assets were sort of rightfully belong to the audience. And then he's like, we're going to keep them and make them into a strategic reserve. And I'm like, wouldn't you want to give them back if they were stolen? Like, that doesn't seem quite like what you were leading up to. He signed off at the end. He said, thank you for having me. Have fun with your Bitcoin and your crypto and everything else you're playing with, which I thought was like a really dismissive sort of like, have fun with your little toys, silly people, give me millions of dollars, please. Bye.
I didn't watch the speech, but I did see that part and I got a good laugh at it.
Yeah, it was really funny. I thought that was really funny. And then immediately after the appearance, he started selling Bitcoin sneakers, which were just gaudy and hideous. And, it seemed very transparently an attempt to sort of empty the pockets of a lot of these Bitcoin billionaires who wanted to get on board with the next winning candidate. So, it seemed pretty transparent to me, but perhaps I'm a little biased on that.
Yeah, and I'm not really surprised by anything that you're saying there, right? That's kind of what I would expect, that he's making an appearance, that he's been fed the talking points he needs to say, but otherwise he's just going to go on his kind of rambling act that he usually does. I know that there was some frustration, anger that Kamala Harris wouldn't come to the Bitcoin conference. Do we have any idea of her stance on crypto and whether the industry has been successful at all in trying to get close to her campaign?
Yeah, so right around the Bitcoin conference was when this whole shift happened, and Harris had just taken on the role of presidential nominee, and she was starting to gain some momentum. And so this sort of rah-rah Republican Trump, here's our next president thing took a bit of a shift. The organizer of the Bitcoin conference claimed 2 days before the conference was supposed to begin that we're in talks with the Harris campaign about her coming to speak at the conference. And I was like, that's weird. And then a day later, he was like, it didn't happen. Of course, she doesn't want to come. It would be terrible for her. Totally trashed Harris to, his adoring fans. To me, it seemed like a pretty transparent bluff. Maybe they sent an email and she acknowledged the email or something, but I don't think they were in serious talks. For one, it would have been one of her very first appearances as presidential nominee. And just the idea of her doing one campaign rally and then going to the Bitcoin conference is just a weird way to start a campaign, especially as a Democrat. So I think that was really just a publicity stunt by the Bitcoin organizers. I don't suspect there were actually serious conversations happening, but there have been attempts to reach out to the campaign. There was a story in the Financial Times about how her campaign team was supposedly seeking a reset with the cryptocurrency industry. Again, it wasn't clear if that story was coming out of these crypto executives who reportedly met with her team or if it was coming from her team. So it may be a part of an attempt from the industry to portray things as being a little bit smoother between the industry and the Democratic administration than they really are. But there have been some overtures. Some Democratic Congress people wrote a letter during the Bitcoin conference to the DNC urging them to take a friendlier stance. Again, that was certainly a publicity thing as much as anything. It was timed to happen during the Bitcoin conference. There was a roundtable recently that happened between some members of the Biden-Harris administration and cryptocurrency executives. That supposedly didn't go very well from the reporting that I've heard. It sounds like the executives in that meeting were pretty hostile to the people who are there from the government end of things, which maybe wouldn't be my strategy if I was trying to mend fences. But so there have been these attempts. Tonight there's supposed to be a Crypto for Harris event to try to mimic some of these other, like Black women for Harris and dudes for Harris and all that stuff. I'm very interested to see how that will go. But it seems tepid, maybe at best. And a lot of the hype about a supposed softening towards the crypto industry seems to be coming from that industry rather than from Harris and her campaign team.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when you say tonight, that's August 14th, when we're recording, not the date that you'll be listening to this. I feel like I have some concerns about the Harris campaign and its relationship to the tech industry, given that she is from Silicon Valley and has fundraised from them before, given that she has two Uber executives, one current, one former, on her campaign team, and given that she hasn't, made a strong defense of Lena Khan, as some of these tech billionaires are calling for her to be removed. But I feel like when it comes to crypto policy, that's one of the areas where I'm not so concerned about her caving in to tech industry interests. I think that is something that we'll be watching to see, how it progresses and how it develops. And as you're saying, how much the crypto industry is trying to show that they're trying to get in with the Harris campaign, even if there's not much of a receptive partner on the other side of those talks. But to start to wind up our conversation, I wanted to zoom out and ask about the crypto industry more broadly, right? Because I know that there has been reporting on the increase in like crypto and Bitcoin prices, earlier this year. I know obviously there are still volatile fluctuations, as there always are with the prices of those assets or whatever we want to call them. But from what I've heard, there is not actually a lot of like trading volume supporting those increases in the way that we saw a couple of years ago when supposedly Bitcoin and crypto were going to be the next big thing. How would you assess the state of the industry right now? We know that they're putting all this money into campaign finance and into trying to get laws that are favorable to them, and that there are some companies that are certainly doing well, like Coinbase, it seems. But it also feels like, this industry is nothing like what it was a few years ago. How would you assess that?
Yeah, it's been a bit of an interesting thing to watch, because there was this period during 2020, 2021, where they had really managed to sell a narrative, I think, about crypto being the future of technology and finance. And all of these companies were like, oh, we need to build our product on the blockchain and we need to release an NFT. And, there was this sort of interest from that end of things, as well as retail interest, where people were like, should I buy a Bored Ape? Do I need to get Bitcoin? Average everyday people too, were asking that question. That's missing this time around. So the prices have come back up somewhat from the lows of late 2022 and early 2023. We're back at, what had previously been, approaching the highest prices for Bitcoin. But it's been moving pretty sideways for a while. There hasn't been that leg up that you've seen, in previous spikes. And I think it comes down to the lack of new money coming into the space to some extent, where there just isn't that interest coming from people who don't hold Bitcoin, who aren't interested in the crypto space, because there isn't that much of a narrative around it. People are starting to realize within the crypto community that there is this strong tie between crypto prices and the macro environment. It used to be the story that, oh, Bitcoin's a protection from, the fluctuations of the stock market, from inflation. It's a store of value, much like gold. There were these narratives like that. We're really seeing this fall apart as, the stock market has been more volatile and crypto prices have been right along with it. It's becoming very clear that crypto is very similar to other high-risk asset classes. And when there is uncertainty in financial markets, whether it be because of inflation, rate changes, or, a new administration potentially coming in, people get out of Bitcoin, people get out of risky assets. And so the industry has been struggling with that to some extent. The new narrative, as much as there is one, is really just like, oh, Bitcoin is a financial instrument that you could add to your portfolio, that could be a part of your retirement or investment strategy. Now you can buy Bitcoin ETFs or Ethereum ETFs. They were very excited about this. They were hoping this would open up vast new sources of money that were not previously buying Bitcoin. And there has been interest. I don't want to deny that people are buying Bitcoin ETFs and things like that, but it's not the type of interest that I think they had hoped that would have seen Bitcoin going to $100,000 and beyond. So they're having kind of a tough time right now, I think, in that sense, where they just don't have the story anymore. People got really burned by the last boom and bust. I think people have short memories, but not that short. And I think a lot of people remember FTX. They remember Paris Hilton trying to shill a Bored Ape on Jimmy Fallon and how cringe that was. They remember all these companies saying, oh, we're going to put our project on the blockchain, and then sort of quietly discontinuing those efforts. And so things are a little stagnant right now in the crypto world. And certainly that happens from time to time. It's not like, oh, this is the death rattle of the crypto industry. I don't think that it's appropriate to make that type of prediction at this point, but it doesn't have the type of energy that it had a couple years ago. And I think, to some extent, I wonder if the crypto industry is even self-aware of that. It seems like they're a little high on their own supply right now, and they've really bought their own narrative that, this is the future and we're this powerful force that's influencing politics and all this kind of stuff. But if you speak to like a normal person who's not online 24/7, who's not on crypto Twitter, who is not going to the Bitcoin 2024 conference, they're like, crypto? Isn't that thing that exploded a year or two ago? What are you talking about that they're supposedly changing election outcomes and, people are voting based on their crypto beliefs? It's just not true, and it's a story and that's all it is, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. And I feel like if you talk to people who are kind of not paying attention to tech or to crypto all the time, like we are, their association with crypto is like, isn't that over? Didn't that guy go to jail for fraud? Like, isn't that the weird thing that people were doing a few years ago? Yeah, it's not like something that is stuck around in like the collective consciousness, because now AI is the next big thing, of course. Molly, it's always wonderful to talk to you and to figure out what is still happening in the crypto industry when we assume that, or maybe even hope that it has actually died. But no, it always resurrects itself like a zombie. Great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much, Molly.
Thank you for having me.
Molly White writes the Citation Needed newsletter and is the creator of Web3 is Going Just Great and Follow the Crypto. Tech Won't Save Us is made in partnership with The Nation magazine and is hosted by me, Paris Marx. Production is by Eric Wickham and transcripts are by Brigitte Pawliw-Fry. Tech Won't Save Us relies on the support of listeners like you to keep providing critical perspectives on the tech industry. You can join hundreds of other supporters by going to patreon.com/techwon'tsaveus and making a pledge of your own. Thanks for listening. Make sure to come back next week.